Okay, good morning everyone. So welcome to the April 2021 board meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. My name is Stephen Lightfoot and I'm the chair of the board, and my role today is to lead us through today's agenda. Now, for those of you who've not been at one of our board meetings before, I've got to start by saying that this is a board meeting held in public and it is not a public meeting. It's also important to say that the role of our board is to provide the strategic leadership for the agency, and we're not directly involved in making individual regulatory decisions on specific products, as that's done by the officials within the agency and with the independent advice of our expert committees. I should also make you aware that today's meeting is going to be recorded so that we can publish the video on our websites to provide the opportunity for as many people as possible to see the work that we do. Now, I'm also delighted today that we've got 36 people who've registered to observe our meeting live. We've got 10 people representing patients and patient groups. We've got 8 healthcare professionals. We've got 5 people from commercial companies, 2 journalists, 11 members of our own staff. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us, and you're very welcome. Now, as always, our agenda is based around our strategic objectives, and the main agenda item today is going to be the approval of our 2-year delivery plan. Now, this is the culmination of several months' work as we've been trying to bring all of our different activities, our responsibilities and our ambitions into a single plan of action. So that's going to be a key part of today's agenda. Now, as the board works through the agenda, members of the audience can ask questions, and we're going to use the chat function on Zoom for you to be able to do that, rather than the separate software Slido that we've used in the past. So we're going to try something different this time, just to try and make it easier for people to ask as many questions as you wish. Now, our Director of Communications, Rachel Bosworth, will collate all of the questions, and we'll actually run a question and answer session for all public participants at the end of the meeting. So Rachel, can you just give us a wave just so everyone can see who you are? Thank you, Rachel, and a lovely smile too. I'd also like to introduce my other board colleagues to everyone online as well. So Dr. June Rain, our Chief Executive, can you just give us a wave, June? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
We've got John Fundry, our Chief Operating Officer. We've got John Quinn, our Chief Technology Officer. We've got Dr. Christian Schneider, our Chief Scientific Officer. And then we've got our independent non-executive directors. So we've got Dr. Barbara Bannister. Give us a wave, Barbara. Thank you. Yeah, we've got Mandy Calvert. We've got Professor Bruce Campbell. We've got Mercy Jessingham. We've got Anthony Rogers. Professor David Webb.
Good morning.
And Michael Whitehouse.
Good morning.
So in addition to that, we're also joined on screen today by Ronan MacDonald, who's the Head of Medicines Regulation at the Department of Health. So welcome, Ronan. We're also joined by Fleur Ruder, who's got the most fantastic Northern Lights background behind her, so from the Government Legal Department. We've got Kerry Chalmers from the Scottish Government and Natalie Richards, our Board Secretary. And then last but by no means least, we of course have got Jude, we've got Martin and colleagues from the communications team who are working behind the scenes to make this meeting happen. So thank you to all of their hard work too. So that's the introductions from my point of view. Natalie, can I just check if I've missed anything, or colleagues? Is that okay? Okay, that's great. So that being the case then, we'll just move on to the agenda. So we'll just work through the board pack. On page 1, we've got the agenda. So we do have apologies today from Sam Atkinson, our Chief Quality and Access Officer, from Kathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer in Northern Ireland, and Alison Strath, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer in Scotland. So unfortunately, they couldn't be with us today, but so they do send their apologies. The next item will be declarations of interest. Can I just check if there are any declarations of interest this time? Yeah. Anthony.
I'm just unmuting myself. It's not a declaration of interest as much because I didn't do it, but I wanted to make people aware. We probably don't all read our emails, and I had an email. Suddenly we started receiving emails from device companies saying, we'd love you to join this session. And what had happened is a company had registered me free of charge to an international conference online. And I hadn't noticed the email, obviously, because I just thought it was some advertising. So they've now deregistered me. So one, I wanted to alert the board in case it came up that my name was there and it was to do with pricing of medicines and registration and everything, but also perhaps to alert you to that this is a new practice that's happening, that you get a registered free of charge and you don't even know about it. And it could potentially cause a conflict if you weren't aware of it. So I just wanted to raise that.
Well, certainly a perceived conflict, and that's going to be just as important as an actual one. So yeah, thank you for that. So that's not a direct declaration, but I think it's a word of warning for all of us. So I think, thank you, Anthony, appreciate that. Were there any other specific declarations that we need to be aware of that have not already been declared? No? Okay, that being the case then, we'll move on to the minutes. So they're on page 2 of the board pack. First of all, can I just check if there are any comments about the accuracy of the minutes? No. Okay, so I think on that basis we'll record those and note those, Natalie, as approved. Thank you very much. If we move on to page 7 and just look at the specific actions. So the first item, action number 13, conduct a review of CPRD. That's obviously on our next seminar agenda. So we'll cover that at that particular point. Item number 16 is the delivery plan. That's on the agenda. We'll come to that very shortly. There's a couple of other items that are due today, which is from the Patient Safety Engagement Committee. And so Mercy can pick those up in her item on the agenda. Item number 27, reviewing diversity and inclusion. That's actually been just pushed back a month. Not because it's not important, but actually it's fair to say that Mercy and I attended a workshop with chairs and non-executives of other Department of Health arm's length bodies 3 weeks ago to share the experiences of how each of the arm's length bodies in the department were addressing diversity and inclusion issues. And I know that June has attended a very similar meeting with chief executives of the arm's length bodies as well. So I'm quite keen that we incorporate that into the discussion. When Anthony actually holds the next Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee, we can have a sort of a broader discussion, not only what's going on in the agency, but also some experiences from other parts of the health system too. And then obviously we'll then cover that at the next board beyond that. So that's that one. And then finally, item number 31 was due today, which is seeking ministerial sign-off for the public consultation on the patient and public involvement strategy, which we approved at the last meeting. June, can I just check if there's any update on that?
Yes, things paused slightly with the period of mourning following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, but we're now ready to go, and the aim is to start the consultation in the first week of May.
Perfect. Okay, that's excellent. So we'll look forward to that, because I think it's a good strategy. It's an important component of our delivery plan, in fact. So I think that will be very helpful. Okay, were there any other matters arising that weren't picked up by either the minutes or the actions that anyone wanted to raise? No? Okay. If everyone is content then, let us move on to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is on page 8. That's the current context. What are the current key issues from the Chief Executive's point of view? June, do you want to take us through this, please?
Well, thank you, Stephen, and good morning, everyone. This report for the last month does bring together all the areas of our current activities, really as a scene setter for some of the discussions that will be following on the agenda today. And I'm sure everyone can see that it has been a tremendously busy time for the agency, with a number of important priorities that run concurrently. It's quite a long report, so I'll just highlight 3 main messages before we open up for discussion. Patient safety remains our top priority in all our activities, and I'm sure the board is aware of all the ongoing and intensive work on the safety monitoring of the COVID-19 vaccines. Over 200,000 yellow card reports now received, which is really a great way to understand the perspectives of those who are using the vaccines. Earlier this month, on the 7th of April, we communicated widely on the signal of blood clots with low platelets, which is an extremely rare event, but a plausible link with the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. And we mentioned that last month. Of course, investigation is ongoing, pending further work on the basic science and looking more into the population data as well as the clinical reports. So our expert working group is very active looking into this. In the meantime, advice has gone out to help health professionals and patients appropriately detect and manage risk. I'll mention a couple of other aspects of COVID because they're important. The complication of long COVID is being actively studied now in a major project by the Clinical Practice Research Data Link in partnership with Birmingham University. And all of this, we hope, will help deliver better ways to understand and manage this condition. The second major highlight, of course, is our work on access. And access to the healthcare system and to patients is a pretty key deliverable at this time. NIPSC, the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, has now tested over 55 million doses in the batches of vaccines, which is well in advance of the government target, which is a really important achievement of our NIBS colleagues. Our intensive work on the tests continues in the devices division. We've supported a new pipeline of COVID tests through reviewing the performance, the usability studies, which are part of applications from new manufacturers. So again, a really important area for access. And more exciting news is that the innovative licensing and access pathway has now received a total of 22 applications from new manufacturers. And these aren't all in the very rare conditions, like the first innovation passport was for, but for a very wide range, some common things like diabetes. So very important progress there. And we've started a pilot looking at patient involvement in clinical research. I would like to add a word about our continued focus on partnerships. For example, NICE and Scottish Medicines Consortium in relation to the ILAP. And we've held a workshop with the National Institute for Health Research and also the Health Research Authority as part of the government strategy to improve research. So just to bring my report to conclusion, I must obviously pay tribute to our staff, particularly at this time. The intensive work has really meant a lot of extra effort and endeavour of our staff to deliver both for the agency and for patients and the public. But despite all of this, our change programme is gaining pace. The Pathfinder initiatives we talked about are moving forward. And more than that, we're looking at a particular challenge in terms of our corporate overheads to see how these can be reduced. So Stephen, it's three key messages around safety, access, and of course, our dynamic organisation delivering for patients, because it's only with the staff in our organisation, their efforts and their commitment, that we can take forward not just the obligations of today, but the change we want to see for the future. I'll stop there and really be happy to take questions.
Right, well, thank you very much, June. I think this does just demonstrate the huge breadth and depth of the agency's responsibilities. And, I think we should just record our thanks to the ongoing support and, professionalism of our staff, in what is clearly a very busy time. So, Natalie, I think if we could just record that in the minutes, that would be fantastic. David, do you want to kick us off with a question, please? I think you're on mute, David.
My apologies. So I had two questions for June, but I mean, first of all, I'd like to congratulate June and the agency for the enormously wonderful work they've been doing before, but especially over the last few months. It must have been really hard work to achieve so much in this short time. So the two questions I had, the first one is, so ILAP is obviously coming together and beginning to develop its strengths, spread its wings. What my question was, I suppose, how many, and I know it's early days, but what proportion of applications coming to the agency do you think will go down the ILAP route out of the total that come to the UK?
Okay, do you want to answer that one, June?
Yes, it's difficult to pin that down at this stage because, as I stressed, we've been really delighted and amazed by the uptake. And I think that's because we've been signalling to people, both in industry, in healthcare, and throughout the devolved administrations, that we are truly open for business. So it hasn't reached steady state yet. And that could be because the pathway isn't simply open for those products in early stage development. It will pick up products further along the pathway. So I do think we've had, if you like, a pump priming or a bolus of work that we're delighted to have The second thing to say is that it's a gateway to international work that we do in a collaborative way, particularly for cancer drugs with the Orbis initiative that's led by the FDA. So in a nutshell, I hope that if it's a very adaptable pathway, a sizable proportion of new products will get that intensive partnership end-to-end approach. But ask me again in about, I think it's June or July, we'll come back with a steady state word on that.
Yeah,
and maybe raise a few thoughts is that what should be non-ILAP? In other words, what medicine or device do we not want to reach patients and to deliver in partnership with healthcare and those clinical decision makers? So I'll come back probably middle of the year with an update.
Yeah, and we have ILAP on the June agenda actually. So I know Sam's working quite hard with our various partners. So David, you had a second question, I think?
Yeah, I have a second question. This one's a bit more of an awkward question, I suppose. Might as well warn you that. There's a statement that the GB conditional marketing authorisation aligns with the EU marketing authorisation applicable in Northern Ireland and supports the deployment of the vaccine from April. What would have happened if they hadn't aligned?
So June?
Thank you. Very important question, and one that our colleagues in policy, in legal, as well as on the operational side, think about very carefully. And there are provisions, if we couldn't align, to take this forward. With an area like, and we're talking here about a new COVID vaccine, we still have a high degree of close watching of how Europe has reached its decision. And the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, obviously the first to convert to a conditional marketing authorization, but we expect more to do that. And I'd like to assure everyone listening that the public health aspects here are front and foremost in our minds. Colleagues may be aware of ongoing discussions, for example, about a Janssen vaccine, and therefore we look at the evidence base and contextualize it for UK, for GB, Northern Ireland. So very much a matter of careful consideration. Luckily and fortunately with the Moderna vaccine, there aren't any concerns in that regard, but it's terribly important that people appreciate that as a sovereign regulator, it's our patients, our public, our health service that's front of mind. It may be that if you want to explore this a little further, our legal colleagues might wish to come in, but this is where we are today.
I think it's certainly the subject of a lot of intense negotiation between the UK and European governments. So yeah, I think there's still probably more work to be done in this area to make sure that the nuances around the legal issues are resolved. So that's very much an active piece of work at the moment. Moving on, if we may, Christian, can I bring you into the discussion?
Thanks, Chair. Just to say that this is more of a comment rather than a question, that this is fantastic to see that there are 22 applications in not even 4 months for ILAP. And actually that there is not just, so to speak now, rare indications, but as you said, diabetes. So this is not a classical unmet medical need field, you could say, but this is exactly what we wanted to achieve, that areas where there's maybe not so much incentive, I'm not talking about diabetes now, but more in general, would also be eligible for ILAP, so that we can help patients get access also in those areas. And I'm thinking also about antimicrobial resistance, for example, where antibiotics could also get access to ILAP. And I think this is such a good tool now that we have at hand. And I'm really glad to see that 22 applications have already come in.
Okay, thank you, Christian. That's nice context, actually. Barbara, can I bring you in, please?
Yes, I wanted to ask a question about ILAP as well. It's early days, but are we getting a feel for how much it costs us, bearing in mind we want to look at our expenditure at the moment, compared with a classical pathway for licensing?
June, is it a bit early?
Really important question, and I know it's very firmly on the desk of Dr. Sam Atkinson, our Chief Access Officer, who's not able to be here today. So there will be, by the time we come to an update in June, a much better grip on the costs. But as I say, we've got enough material now to be able to give everyone that better understanding when it comes to the formal update. Very much work in progress.
Thank you.
I think that's a helpful question there. Mercy, can I just bring you in?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. One comment and one question. The comment is that it's really good that we're working with the HRA and the NIHR on streamlining kind of clinical trials and ethics reviews and things like that. And I see it's also reflected in the delivery plan. So well done for that, because that's really exciting to get that sorted. The question was really about Yellowcard Biobank. Now, obviously, I know a bit about what UK Biobank is, because I'm one of the sample. But what is Yellowcard Biobank kind of planned to be? Is this just a cohort of people that kind of report into the Yellowcard scheme? You know, how is that kind of envisioned?
Okay, June?
This is a really exciting and, I have to say, world first initiative to make sure that when these links between a product and an adverse event occur, we're able to properly explore if there is a genetic basis and then be able to manage and minimize risk. And there are some really quite striking figures from work in the literature that we might reduce the burden of adverse reactions by 20 to 30%. So it's a big ambition, but we then have a very extensive database going back a long time of million more plus reports. And we also have the technology and the tools to be able to access samples and store them. So it's a broad initiative at the moment. We've been doing massive stakeholder engagement with the kind of scientists who would be able to optimize the use of this incredible data set, but also with patients and the public, because we want to be absolutely sure that our ambition meets what patients, the public, will want to see from us. So it's an open door for more stakeholder engagement before we have a year of funding before we then move to make some formal proposals, which will most definitely be looked at board level and in the committees, such as the one you chair, Mercy.
So, okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Bruce, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, just a question about item 19, the medical device clinical investigation transparency. It sort of sounds like rather a gradual stepwise plan and therefore potentially slow. And so I ask about it because the agency has been criticised in the past for lack of transparency because it couldn't be more transparent within the previous law. So I'm just concerned about the possibility of reputational damage if this is not seen to be done just as rapidly as possible within the new legislation. Can you comment on that?
Well, that's great. We fully share that ambition to open the door and enable people to use the great data that we hold on the safety of devices to inform decisions. And the importance of taking care is obviously clear, but we do see this as a step change. There are a number of areas where the medicines and medical device will need to be used to phase through the new legislation, but this is a priority, and very glad to say that this will be, let's say, it'll be a new opportunity for everyone to benefit from all the information that's shared with us. So can't give you an actual date, Bruce, but bear with us because it is a step change, and a lot of pilot work has been done to enable us to achieve that ambition. Thank you.
Yeah, there's no doubt that medical device and the new regulations and registries, there's a lot of work going on in this area. So I think we will see progress, Bruce, but I think you're right to hold our feet to the fire on that one. So thank you for that. Mandy, can I bring you in, please?
Thank you. Yes, a couple of questions. One is on the paragraph 7, the pilot to boost patient involvement in clinical research, which I think is very positive. Will that require statutory powers and a new bill to actually make it part of the regulatory process? Or is it something that we could incorporate? Because I'm just thinking that it would make us quite different from the FDA in that aspect.
Thinking is at a reasonably early stage. We do have the opportunity and will be putting through legal powers, legal provisions under the Medicines and Medical Devices Act to really rethink clinical trials. We really want to make a good trade-off between making the UK the best place to launch a new device or a new medicine, having studied it here and using the amazing opportunity of the NHS, and any other differences from other jurisdictions that might lead to some trade-offs. So it's a very active discussion at the moment, and I think one that will get the right balance. Your specific question, do we need new legal provisions? I don't think it's essential, although I'm under the management of Fleur, but I think we may want to do something in our once in a generation opportunity to make, as I say, the clinical trial ecosystem and environment the best it can possibly be. And that does mean, a final comment, absolutely building on the incredible response of patients and the public during the COVID pandemic. 100,000 enrolled to take part in vaccine research really quickly. And if there's a big thank you that needs to be said today, it's to the patients and public who gave their data to give us progress. So let's take it away, let's look at it carefully and create that environment that we want to see.
Yeah, I think that's really important actually. And as you'll have seen, Mandy, in the delivery plan, obviously one of the objectives is overhauling the clinical trial system. And I don't know, Christian, is there anything else that you want to add? Because obviously that's very much your area of responsibility.
I think this is the main focus indeed, to make the clinical trial area even more streamlined. I think we have shown how agile we can be, but indeed, since there are other players in the system and we want to involve patients more, I think there is more to be done. So I can't add more, but just to confirm that this is indeed what we will be doing.
Excellent. Okay. And I think you had a second question, Mandy.
I did. Hopefully that's a little bit more straightforward. Just the amazing work that NIPSC's done on approving all of the batches for COVID. I'm just thinking about our forward workload in that way. Is how have we got good plans for what we think the forward workload will be, if this could continue for some time, and how that's going to impact our funding and transformation?
Well, it's a great question. It's constantly under review as the perspective changes. And in fact, the bigger picture on COVID, and colleagues may wish to also comment, is probably that we'll need annual boosters. So it's not just can we get all the vaccines that we have on the order book appropriately deployed, but have we got a long-term plan? And as that becomes clearer, when the ambitions of PHE and the government become clearer, then I think we will have again a steady state approach to this. But for today, I really wanted to say, again, congratulations to NIBS, because what a stellar performance. And no longer are we hearing words like, is it a barrier, but more the flow of those products out to the deployment of the vaccines has been incredible. But Christian, I don't know if you're abreast through Stephen with the plans for an annual booster and what that might mean for us.
Thanks. So just to echo the big thanks to NIPSC and colleagues, and obviously also to those who kept the batch release in other areas flowing well. I think that is also very important, because COVID patients would also need certain products that we are batch releasing. So I think that this has been quite a tremendous effort from the Institute. But that aside, obviously it is correct that if we would need booster doses, then we would already be in some sort of a steady state for the vaccines. We have planned well ahead for this. So either we are using external expertise to help out there and retrained colleagues, and we also have temporary staff, and obviously we will have to see how that would then maybe have to be prolonged, or maybe put into an overall expansion of the workforce if that was necessary, if this was really yearly booster doses. Just to say that for updated vaccines, because it might well be that they're updated, we will have to see what impact that would have on batch release. Very likely the assays will not change. So it will just, what we are assaying will change, but we'll have to see. So that is also under constant surveillance, so to speak, so that we are always ahead of the game.
I think this is a great example of actually how the agency is outward looking and actually being proactive in terms of preparation for, clearly as a major issue we're dealing with. So again, thank you for that. Michael, sorry to leave you so long.
No, it's all right, no problem. Just a question and an observation. If I start with the observation, really echo all the comments, positive comments about NIBs. We had an audit committee last week, and the one area that we did look at in a little bit more depth was the cost of NIBs. And I think we were a little bit surprised that we hadn't seen the cost in the last financial year increasing substantially because of the work that has been done in terms of the vaccine and the fact that staff being redeployed. The agency is looking at that. I think it's important that we do have full transparency of the additional cost incurred in responding to COVID and the development of the vaccines and the rollout, because this is important, because it's the baseline, in my view, by which we bid for additional money if we decide that is the right thing to do as part of the next spending round in July. So I would just make that as an observation. I think the agency are on it, but it is important that we have transparency of cost. My question really is just around, again, ILAP, which is brilliant. It's to June, really. As we are now a standalone regulator, is this innovative process, how does it put us in relation to the rest of the world? Are we cutting edge in terms of how we are trying to get products to market? Or are we in the middle? It's just an interesting issue for me.
Okay.
Well, thank you. A quick reflection on your first point, though. Yes, we've got a good grip of the funding aspects of COVID, and we'll be keeping ARAC abreast of that. But on your second question, yes, without reservation, yes, this is breaking new ground. And I think that the beauty of ILAP, if I can call it that, is that we have an environment that enables the end-to-end process from the subject in the trial through to the standard of healthcare. And if we can capitalise on that, the UK becomes, not just for the life sciences industry, the best place to evaluate a new device or a medicine, but actually our patients, our public, our healthcare service is benefiting on that access. So we're more than open for international collaboration like Orbis, but it's all in the end to deliver for our health service and our patients.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think actually when we do the review in June, Michael, it might well be worth just providing some external context in terms of how this compares with other regulatory systems around the world, to just demonstrate the point that June's just made, that this genuinely is cutting edge, bringing regulatory approval and health technology assessment in a combined process by the two different arms of the two arms length bodies involved. So I think that's very positive. Okay, I think June, we seem to have exhausted the questions, but that's been a really helpful discussion. I think I'd just like to suggest that we note your report with thanks, and thanks again to everyone who's been involved in delivering this. It's a massive team effort, so we genuinely appreciate it. So I think if we can move on to the next agenda item, that's around financial sustainability, and in particular, what are the priorities, accountabilities and key measures of the MHRA delivery plan? This is again another huge team effort that's actually been ongoing for several months. The board's come to looked at this at various stages in its development. So John Fundry, our Chief Operating Officer, do you want to just make some introductory comments, and then we can work our way through the paper?
Thanks, Stephen. So yes, some brief introduction, then perhaps a few words from June, and then we'd value the board's views on the kind of final draft. So as the board's aware, we've previously agreed that instead of the usual 5-year time horizon for our business plan, we'd focus on the next 2 years, recognising the significant changes as we define a new regulatory system outside Europe, design a new organisation to deliver that, the need to make significant investments in our underlying systems to underpin those changes, and seek to embed the lessons learned from our response to COVID. And as we've considered a number of times, we also need to meet the challenges Baroness Cumberledge laid down for us. In short, the delivery plan is intended to be aspirational and meet all those challenges. The delivery plan literally puts patients first as our #1 central objective, together with 13 other objectives over 6 key themes: scientific innovation, healthcare access and patient safety are the three business areas, and those are supported by enabling themes, if you like: dynamic organisation, collaborative partnerships, and of course financial sustainability. These are all interlinked, and my belief is we must succeed in all of these 6 themes if we are to get where we need and want to be. The plan sets clear accountabilities with clear executive committee ownership and dates for delivery. For those that want the detail, Annex B shows the ExCo ownership of each theme and each objective. Our balanced scorecard, which will go live next month, will help us track progress. We need to do more, I believe, on outcome measures, although not everything that is reflected in the delivery plan can actually be measured. In parallel, we're developing a branded document to support stakeholder engagement. We'd value the board's views, I think, on 3 aspects. Is it aspirational enough, and does it reflect the required changes we need to make? Is it balanced, given our need to execute the change programme, our response to COVID, and all the other work we need to do? And finally, perhaps, does putting patients first come through, or do we need to do more to reflect that? So that's what I'd like to say by way of introduction, Stephen. Perhaps a few words from June before we open it up more widely.
Yeah, that would be great. June?
Well, thank you. And thanks to the colleagues who've really worked so hard, but it has been a great team effort. What I'd like to say is that the presentation of the delivery plan today is a very significant moment for the agency. It's so much more than a business plan or a future strategy. It is the path to a new era in regulation, innovation, and regulatory science underpinning that. And it is the era, as John has said, that puts patients and the public at the centre of our work. It provides for an agile and enabling regulator, delivering transformative products in the kind of way we've mentioned just now. And it builds on our response to COVID-19, all the important lessons that have been learned. And is it ambitious? Is it ambitious enough? It has to be, because to deliver the outcomes that we wish to deliver, we need to really stretch now and reach out over the next 2 years. So I'm very keen to hear the discussion today and answer the 3 questions that John has set.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, I think that's the challenge for us. So if we've got 3 questions to consider, why don't we just, rather than mix them all up, do them one at a time, just to go through in a systematic way to make sure we do that. Bruce wants to make a comment before we do that, I think.
Well, before I even heard the questions, I'd scribbled all over this because I think this document is missing important opportunities to show that patients and the public are something that's really embedded in the plan. The first mention of them specifically is on page 8. They're number 1 in the ExCo responsibilities, but there is actually nothing in the text until page 8. And so, for example, under domain 1 on page 4, surely you should have something about this will be accompanied by increased public understanding. In domain 2, our purpose, greater involvement of patients and the public, it's not there. And then our plan, surely our plan should have something in it about patient and public involvement, because it only comes later. And surely this text should be there in each domain, and it's signally missing at the moment. Sorry to sound so impassioned, but that's how I felt when I read it.
Yeah, okay, well, let's do the last question first. So in terms of, does anybody else share Bruce's views on the patient, putting patients first not coming through enough? Mercy.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's obviously, kind of, a priority and for everybody to have, but Bruce is right, really. I think we need it kind of reflected right from the beginning. And because I was looking at this really on the overall tone of it as well, because this is going to be our public facing document and plan for the next 2 years. So, tone is really important. I think it is ambitious. There's areas where it could be more ambitious, but actually coming from the start on how patients are really put first is really important. So I do agree with that. Just notice in just some of the language, I mean, we have our brilliant life sciences, mentioned. I noticed that the next line, it doesn't say brilliant NHS, so you know, our health services. So I think you just need to be a little bit careful on tone and what you're celebrating. We have got, we can acknowledge our success. We've had an amazing year where the agency really has come up to scratch. So I would like to see some of that kind of reflected, but yeah, the tone needs to get right, needs to be right. I remember when we used to look at this, when achieving kind of stuff at NICE, we had a particular non-exec who always talked about the smug test, you know, because it's great to celebrate all the successes, but as June says, this is going to be a tough couple of years. We've got a lot of challenges going on here. So I think the tone overall is right, but there are things that can be, you know, better.
Just coming back to Bruce's point around patient involvement, you know, you are right, Bruce, that patient involvement maybe isn't mentioned at the beginning, but patients are mentioned in the title, and patients are mentioned through this. So I think we just need to be careful that we're not confusing the fact that patients are not mentioned at all. Well, I think what you're saying is patient engagement and patient involvement is not mentioned right up front. Can I just be clear on that?
Well, I think what I'm saying is that it ought to be, if we are serious about it really being embedded in all of this, surely there ought to be something about it in most of the domains, in most of the paragraphs, and currently there isn't. That's all I'm suggesting, that you just have some text to show how in each part of it there is commitment to patient involvement and engagement.
Yeah, no, I think that piece of context is quite important. Okay, Anthony, can I bring you in, because you have a lot of experience in this area?
Yeah, I agree, but I sort of disagree. I think what I'd like to do is comment on the fact that this is so much more improved than any documents we've seen in the past in this sort of planning. You know, we've seen 60-page documents, and I think the earlier drafts of this did have a lot more detail in each section, and the executive and the organisation have done what we asked of them, which is to simplify and to focus. I think if we look at the plan and objectives slide in item 5, the very centre of it is that single objective for every member of staff in the agency, that patient in public and patients are first. So every single person in the organisation will be monitored against that as part of their performance this year, alongside the different groups and the other priorities. So I think we could review the language, but I don't want to use a phrase that was used in the last board meeting, become tokenistic about this. And perhaps it's more about having some very clear statements up front, or reorganising and putting that slide at the very front of the document. And then I think the context of what's said in each area is such an improvement on where we've been before. It's focused. I mean, yeah, I can argue about wording, and Mercy, I support your comment about brilliant pharma and NHS and all that sort of stuff, but the concepts and answering the questions, I think, are the way we should go with this. I think it's a learning, and the learning's been good so far. That's my view.
Okay, great, thank you. Mandy, just bring you in, please.
Yes, I must admit, I'm a little bit more with Antonia. I think patients have to underpin that and our public impact. So I think that is embedded. Where I would agree with Bruce is in each of the deliverables, I think we need to make it clearer what the patient involvement is, and also what the systems involvement is. Because I think the two key areas which are going to make it, well, there's 3 areas. One is our staff and organisation, what's taken to make that deliverable real, what are the systems, and then what is the impact on patients. So those sort of 3 things maybe could be embedded a little bit more in each of the deliverables. And I particularly think also about the systems, because so often that is affecting the investment and the costs and our ability to make change. And it's still at the end, and I think it gets lost, because that's so integral to how an innovative regulator works. Is our use of data. So I would like to see that a little bit more embedded, so people see that we can't do our job without our processes and systems, our skills, and having patients at our heart.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And the other point, when we raise this at ARAC, is our loss of trading fund status. It might be a topic for another time, but I think we really need to understand that in terms of what we mean for our long-term investment and that what implications. And that's making me quite nervous at the moment, perhaps because I don't understand it fully.
Yeah, well, and there's a whole objective around financial sustainability, which we will absolutely come back to. Michael, can I just bring you in? And then
yeah, I'm really just echoing what others say. I'm not as far as Bruce is on this. What I would say is I'm more interested, to be truthful, in delivering the change programme, and I would echo what Anthony said. There's more detail in here than we've ever had before. So the detail gives me a lot of confidence that we've got stuff that we can measure. I wonder, and it really relates to something that Mandy said, that we could deal with the issue around patient engagement. What the layperson often worries about, or if they ever get involved in the MHRA, it's about what does it actually do? And I encountered a similar problem at the NEO where MPs didn't really understand our approach or our system. There's something about having upfront in this document. How do we regulate? And that would show very clearly that at the heart of regulation is patient interest. And I was looking for that simplistic document that has got longevity. It would come up year after year after year because it's the established way of working. And it really relates to Mandy's point about what is the system. And if you have patients at the heart of that, I think that would follow through. But we mustn't lose a lot of the stuff in here because it's really good. And I think it begins to enable us to get real leverage within the organisation.
Okay, great. Okay, and Barbara, can I just bring you in?
Yes, Michael has said half of what I wanted to say about patients knowing what we do and how. But the other thing is, I think we've sort of overlooked that engagement with us will mean different things to different people. And actually what's important is the discourse, that they know what we do, but we know their experience and their information that they can give to us. And of course, that those patients who take part in clinical trials or reviews will give us a different sort of thing. And they might learn something from taking part as they do. So I think the openness of the discourse and the accessibility to discourse and meaning patient areas for discourse in our communication systems are as important as the nitty-gritty. And for an example, when we look at the intense discussion there was some years ago about treatments for Alzheimer's disease, which was said to be ineffective because they didn't improve people's memory. Well, we were testing the wrong thing because they were effective in making people able to live and engage with their families and their environment. And that's not something that's easy to measure. So I think that's one of the ways patients are really important to us.
Yeah, but there's, what you're saying is one size does not fit all on this. And clearly different requirements from different groups. Just before we carry on, can I just maybe come back to June and just sort of say that obviously just reflecting on some of those comments, is there anything you want to just respond with?
I'm really grateful for the insights, actually. It's at this stage when, you know, a separate set of perspectives, peer review, if you like, really helps. And I'm encouraged by what we can do to get this as good as it can. It's so significant for the agency. I think Bruce is right. We need to make sure that we are looking systematically at patient involvement. And if it looks like that it's only in certain areas, then that won't pass the test that we're setting ourselves. And I agree that tone is really important. I think that actually having that slide that shows that real focus, it's like a dashboard in itself, right at the front will help. But we do need to be focused in order to prioritize and to deliver. Impact has come up a number of times. We've always got to translate that. We have got a meeting with the Cumberledge Patient Reference Group next week, and we'll be teasing out with those patients what kind of impact they would be valuing. I think on the side of the trading fund, we've got a plan to look at what that moving into the department will mean for us. But I think, just to finish, the idea that we get clearer about what we're doing as a regulator, it's so timely. And the work that we've done during our change programme, we've called it rather buzzily, the moments of value that we add while preserving the independence that a regulator has to have to be trusted, then I think we'll test it against that as well. So we'll talk, I'm sure, about the next round, but I think we're, I would say, if I'm not being too bold, almost there, but the last stage that we're looking at now is really important.
Yeah, so I think the tone component is very important. And John Fundry, just to bring you in, so one of the next steps is to actually look at the public facing document. And so we have the opportunity to make those amendments and to make sure we can capture the essence of what's been talked about around the patient engagement involvement up front and some of those tone issues.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, Stephen. So that's very helpful feedback. Our comms colleagues are working on the stakeholder branded version of this document. And I think that gives us the opportunity to ensure the tone reflects it, and that we bring out the patientricity, which I think is embedded in the detail. And I keep threatening people with the 70 slide pack. We just need to bring it a bit more into the abbreviated material, I think.
And I think actually the other part we shouldn't lose in all of this was also about, I think his point that Mandy was making about ensuring that the deliverables all involve some sort of patient involvement component, because that'd be very easy just to sort of window dress the front of the document and not actually address that, because otherwise we don't fully address the point that Bruce started the discussion on, to make sure that it is integral all the way through. So I think just think about what the patient involvement components are for those. Anthony, did you want to come back on that?
It's actually a slightly different point on the basis of the overall discussion. One of the things that I feel there's an opportunity to consider, and I'm sort of jumping ahead to the ODRC paper, in that we've asked for a more detailed understanding of the scope of what we will be delivering. So if you like, the productivity of the organisation, what we're going to be able to deliver within the budgets and the resources that we have. And I think what's missing for this is that we're undergoing a magnificent but significant change. And we may not get it all right first time. In fact, I'd be absolutely surprised if we did. And I think there is an opportunity to be built into this, a review of the change, but also the productivity of the organisation. If we are finding that with the resources, for example, in certain area, we're not, even though we've speeded up processes and we've changed processes, how are we going to be capturing the data and the information that we need to go back to the department, to go back to the government and say, this is an area that there's demand and we haven't got the resources. And that's just not built in for me, but I think it should be.
Okay, no, that's a helpful suggestion. Michael, was that a related point? Or?
A slightly different one, Stephen, only for me. And I was just looking at it. If I was working in, say you were presenting this to a series of investors who were looking to fund us, and there's no different, we're looking to the Treasury and the department. John said something about having to develop outcome measures. I suppose where I'm more interested in at this stage in the development of the agencies, if you take some of these priorities, at the end of 2 years, some of them hopefully will become business as usual. So, for example, the innovative care part, the ILAP or whatever we're calling it, I would hope by the end of 2 years that is broadly business as usual. Others, I think, have got a longer burn because they're inherently difficult. And I'd just like, it may be in the way in which the reporting back to the board develops, but I'm particularly interested in where will we have got to in 2 years' time. Some of them will have been done deals, others will not be. And I think that will reflect also the degree of risk inherent in each of these priorities. So there's something around that I'm particularly interested in. What will we have achieved? What will we have more to do? And it partly relates to Anthony's very good point, because we won't achieve everything. And I think as we go forward over the next 2 years, it may help us when we have to readjust or rebalance.
Okay, well, obviously Appendix C starts to show some of the phasing, but John Fundry, just to bring you in on that one in terms of, how we can articulate, the progress of the key objectives, and, some inevitably will have more work to do for after 2 years, and some will be more complete, I guess.
So one of the thoughts that we have is trying to perhaps capture this on a plan on a page, which maps out the various elements. Now, there's a lot of material to try and encapsulate on one page, but we're going to have a go at trying to do that and making sure we're integrating these aspects in the change program, and perhaps that will give a flavour that Michael's looking for. So, what will we have done in 2 years' time, and then where will the arrows be going beyond that, and that may help it.
That would be very good. Thanks, John.
Yeah, because and that was one of the real reasons for wanting to keep this as a 2-year plan, because there's a number of elements of transformation and change that just need to be done, and they will have to be finished in the next year to 18 months. And there'll be other issues that are longer term strategic ambitions that will take several years and may never be finished, and it'll continue to evolve, I guess. That's probably the way I'm thinking about it. But June, have you got a different view?
Oh, definitely. And I think what we're looking to do with our change programme is actually be quite clear about the areas that will have growth potential and those that are necessary to deliver the first phase, if you like, of the transformation. And what we're talking about now, I think, is making sure there's a clear read across to the delivery plan. But it's certainly been something we've been discussing. Michael's absolutely right. Some things will be a factor of the immediate transformation. Others will be longer term growth. And we need to be clear about that, because it won't all be done in 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So just coming back to, sorry, Mandy, you had a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, just I think reinforcing Michael's point about maybe articulating the risks a little bit better. So we're sort of setting that out now, and I think that's particularly important for the board, maybe less important for the sort of public engagement. But I think it's just we need to make sure we're quite realistic, because we will have to make some trade-offs, and I think that would be very helpful as we progress going through, because stuff will change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are two things here, aren't there? Because I think one is, if you like, stating out what our public ambition is, and I think that's what we're trying to get to for stage one. Next month, we need to be talking about how we're going to report to the board, and I think the risk and progress and outcomes of that are going to be really vitally important. So I think we can maybe come back to that next month, if that's okay, Mandy. But yeah, so certainly John set us the challenge of 3 questions. So I think we've covered, largely, putting patients first and patient involvement in particular. Can I just check what the board's view is? Is this aspirational enough? I know there were 1 or 2 comments, but I'll be honest, it strikes me that this is aspirational, because if you try to pull all of these things together into one plan, it's been a massive, massive piece of work. There's only so many hours in the day. We're going to change the organizational structure in the next few months. We have to be just realistic that we can't necessarily, there's no endless pot of money here. But Anthony, I know you guys have discussed this at the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee. What's your view on, is this ambitious enough?
I think it's incredibly ambitious. Yeah. I mean, effectively what we're doing is merging 3 major businesses that all deliver well for their customers and are all in periods of innovative growth, bringing them all together, trying to cut costs, save money, and make ourselves sustainable. So for 2 years to do that is a really challenging opportunity. And so I think it certainly is, yes.
Yeah, okay, no, thank you for that. And Mercy, what's your view?
Yeah, just to reiterate, I do think it's very challenging. This is my first plan in the organisation, because obviously I wasn't here for approval of previous plans, and I like it's 2 years, I like it's focused, and I like it's ambitious. So I want to congratulate people for actually pulling that together. And I also wanted to say that I really like the clear accountabilities in this plan as well, and that on communications and stuff, it's to the CEO under section 12, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, that's great. Maybe just to bring in one of our executive colleagues, I'm just thinking of John Quinn. In terms of ambition, you obviously you've got a lot of experience of managing change through the organisation. John, what's your perspective around, is this ambitious enough?
I was just put my hand up as you were inviting me in. I think building on Mercy's point, I think these are delivery plan priorities and objectives. The actual plan that sits under it, because this says what we're going for. What we now have to do is turn this into reality, and we know that there'll be cross-project dependencies. Things will get delayed and knock other things out. So what I see here is rightly ambitious. I think the next phase we have to go to is how do we turn these into requirements and delivery choices. And I think back onto the trade-offs point that Mandy mentioned, there'll be trade-offs to make as we go along. So yes, it is ambitious, I think rightly so. The next phase in the quarter is to produce the plan that shows how we implement it, and I think we'll get more sense as we go as to how solid this would be and how achievable.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, again, you've got a critical role in this, John, as your other executive colleagues have as well. So, I think that's quite helpful context. The other question that John asked us was, is this a balanced plan? So, again, Chris, just bring Christian in again, just from an executive perspective, because I'm really keen to hear the executive perspective here, because you guys are the ones that are delivering this. Does it feel balanced to you, having been through all the detailed discussions in its development?
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Well, indeed, I was just about to flag up to say that I find it balanced. I find it ambitious. And I like the comment that there's only so much time you have in a day. So when you look at the layers below these items, there's quite a bit of work to be done to make these happen. It will also depend on external partners. So we will also need time and engagement to work with them. So I think given the time frame of 2 years that we have, I think it is ambitious and to the level that it is deliverable. And now having discussed across the portfolios, I think that it is balanced as well.
Okay. Great. Okay, and just also, if I can maybe just bring John Fundry in. John, obviously, I know you will obviously think it's ambitious and balanced because you presented the paper to us. But actually, can I just ask what worries you most about this plan? Because obviously you've been involved in the detail of putting it together, working with colleagues. I'd be interested in your perspective around what you're most worried about.
Well, let me start with some positives, Stephen, perhaps picking up the comments of others. I think for the first time, we do have clear accountabilities and deliverables set out, and I think that's clearly a very good start. In the several months that we've actually been developing this, one of the constant themes has been that to try and avoid overscheduling the first 6 months or 9 months of this year. If I'm honest, I'm not sure we've actually successfully done that. In our defense, I think there are elements of this, such as financial sustainability, dynamic organization, that we cannot defer. But when we come to the risk discussion in future meetings that Mandy and others have set up, there is a risk that we are trying to redesign the organization and in parallel execute significant amounts of new work, and whether we have the capacity and capability to do that, and that's still a question in my mind, if I'm honest.
No,
so I think we've got to the right point, but there is a risk.
Yeah, and I think if we can be clear about what we want to achieve, which I think is what this plan is laying out, there's more work to be done on an ongoing basis, week in, week out with the executive team in terms of how we deliver that. And I think it's a matter of keeping the board informed. So I think there's a clear executive responsibilities. There's then a reporting mechanism we need to understand, what's going well, what's not going so well, what are the trade-offs, and where do you need strategic input from the board. So, I think there's I think we can pick up that risk issue through that, John, would be my view. Ronan, can I just, you've just disappeared off the screen now. I was going to ask what the Department of Health view was on our delivery plan, but I can't do that now. So, June, any sort of other reflections from yourself, having listened to the discussion?
Yes, I'm absolutely with John F. on the importance of the clarity of accountabilities and for capacity to be front of mind. I think the word is focus that's come up right throughout this discussion. And there is absolutely no doubt when it comes to trade-offs, it's the public health that comes first, and that we have to always be available to act and to protect. But the DHSC, as you've turned to Ronan, has given us a bit of headspace, particularly with the reliance mechanisms for authorisation over the next 2.5 years. And I do believe if we keep our focus up, we can do this. And really, we owe it to everyone to do it. I totally endorse your wish for regular reporting and look to the board to readjust, particularly refocus as we move forward in a very active way. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And just while we're here, I don't know if Kerry Chalmers, you're online. I can't see your picture, but I just wondered if there's any particular perspective from one of our devolved administrations on the delivery plan. No, okay, Kerry must have left us. But Ronan, you're back. Just as you left, unfortunately, I was asking the question of what's the Department of Health's view on this delivery plan. So just wondered if there's any
very convenient.
Yeah, if there's any perspective you wanted to add.
Well, first of all, a huge thanks, because we've been involved at every stage of drafting the plan, and I can see how it's evolved over time. So we're very impressed. I think particularly I pick out the fact that the timelines are now very detailed, and I like that it's been presented in the board as a sort of single timetable of work happening, which is something we wanted to see. I also thought there were a lot of efforts to integrate the patient safety objectives with other objectives in the plan, but I definitely take the point that the headline narrative needs to be improved on that. I think if we're allowed one last sort of pet point on this, I just point to objective 12, which is about building public trust through the communications of the organisation. And I think even as the plan has been drafted, it's become ever more clear how important that is to the organisation in recent weeks. And I just wonder if people could take one more look at that and see if there's any way of making it any more specific, or reconsidering whether there's more ambition in this area, given how important public safety communications have become. But all the right things are in there. I just wondered if it needed any more.
I think we could probably pick that up in practice, Ronan, because actually the communication strategy is coming to the board next month.
Oh, great.
So in reality, I think rather than trying to wordsmith the delivery plan, let's actually discuss the strategy itself next month, because I think that's actually where we really need to make sure that delivers for us. So it's going to be one of the first strategies to come through since the approval of the delivery plan. So that's how important I see this, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, that sounds entirely appropriate, because the plan mentions all the right things already. So we'll just be interested in the next layer of detail. So thank you.
But that would be great. Okay, so I think that we've obviously talked around a number of the issues. So I think in terms of putting patients first and patient involvement, we do need a little more work on the tone of the public-facing document. But again, it's also important, as I think we've already mentioned, that we maybe just take the opportunity just to review the deliverables, just to make sure that patient involvement comes through in each of the objectives, wherever that's particularly relevant. I think my general feeling from listening to the discussion is there is a sense that this plan is ambitious. Yeah, it's maybe verging on almost too ambitious, but it's the right thing to do, and we absolutely have to deliver on this. So I'm seeing a sense of commitment to want to do this in the full recognition this is a challenging set of things to do all at the same time. We are literally driving along the motorway and changing the wheels on the bus at the same time, and that's the analogy I would probably use. But we've got this opportunity. We can't wait for 2 years. We just have to do this. And I think actually, yes, it is broadly balanced, but I think as in the army, they often say any plan only survives the first contact with the enemy. So in reality, that first contact point, that's when you start adapting and adjusting your plan as you move forward. So that's why I think the reporting mechanism is important. We'll need to look at trade-offs, but as long as we can use this plan as to say this is what we want to achieve, I think the how we'll need to continue to iterate over the next 2 years. That will be my sense of how we need to go forward. So if that provides an appropriate summary of the discussion, can I just ask if people are content that, with the caveats of looking at the wording around patient involvement, can we approve this plan, please? Can I just see a show of thumbs up? Okay. Is anybody not content? Let's be really clear. No. Okay. Okay. On that basis then, Natalie, if we can then say that the plan has been approved. Thank you again for, a massive team effort across the agency. It's a real challenge bringing all these things together. It really is. But I think actually it's exactly what we need to do at this particular moment in time. So thank you very much for that. If we move on to the next agenda item, that's on page 39 of the board pack, that's on patient safety and what assurance can be provided by the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee. Mercy, you've provided a short paper. Are there any introductory comments you'd like to make? And then we can move to questions.
Yes, a few. First of all, I want to apologise for the typo in 1.1. I've called it the Innovation Licensing and Access Pathway, and it's the Innovative. So sorry for that. And also for the introduction of more acronyms into the organisation, which I don't particularly like acronyms, but sometimes they're rather useful instead of going into the long kind of issue. So PSEC is another acronym that we've introduced. Just to say that this is the second meeting of the committee, and we had quite a meaty agenda. We had some really key issues to discuss and items to discuss. And I think we had an open and frank discussion and really about kind of working together on what the committee needed to, kind of assure the board that things were kind of moving in the right direction. And after a really good in-depth discussion on kind of from non-execs and execs on the committee, it became clear what we needed was much more kind of metrics and measurables and evaluation. We also needed a baseline because actually can't take it for granted that certainly the non-execs and the independent independent members of the committee actually know what the agency is doing in detail. So we really do need that kind of start line, and in order to assess, are we going in the right direction? So I want to thank colleagues on the committee for that frank and open discussion. And I think by the end of it, we were much clearer, and everybody was much clearer about the kind of reports that we needed and the kind of information we needed. So that's just putting it into context. Obviously, the areas we looked at was for CPRD, the implementation of a new approval process for the use of data, really trying to include patients more, and the committee did its job of scrutinising that quite well. For the healthcare professional strategy, healthcare professionals are a really useful resource for us, and they're a conduit to patients as well. So we really do need to engage them more, but we need more data on how we are engaging them currently and how we can take this forward. And of course on the ILAP, now ILAP is really important. It could be a really good model for other areas of work within the agency. So of course we scrutinise these proposals in great detail. And as I said, for all the reports, it was kind of really important that we had more information really coming back. And I think the authors of reports also welcomed that they were clearer, as we all were, by the end of the meeting, what the committee needed to assure the board. And of course, we also covered the yellow card scheme, which is a really key area for us. The bit I really want to highlight, though, for the board is the proposal we have to change the terms of reference. It became clear that the minutes of the February meeting would not be approved to this meeting and then go on the public website. Whereas actually I did a report, in February for the on the committee meeting in February. So it seemed just a bit more appropriate and more timely for these assurance reports to be the public facing document of the committee, as opposed to waiting for the minutes. So that's what I'm proposing that we approve, that it's these assurance committees that were scheduled all the way through the year that come to the board, that are a more timely way of reporting back on what the committee considered.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Mercy. Obviously, I think we need to recognise it's a new committee. You've only had the 2 meetings, so I think getting into these operating mechanisms and approaches can only be positive. But I think also something that maybe just occurred to me as we were listening to you there is there's going to be a new member to your committee, and that will be our new Chief Safety Officer. And June, I just wondered if you wanted just to make the board formally aware. I think we are all informally aware of the appointment of a Chief Safety Officer.
Yes, delighted to say that Dr. Alison Cave, who's currently at the UK Research and Innovation, is coming, I believe, on the 19th of July as our new Chief Safety Officer. And she brings a wealth of experience in the UK in the regulator, but also at European Medicines Agency, where she's been particularly leading the use of real-world evidence and big data to make better decisions. So we're really going to welcome her to hit the ground running and to be part of the PSEC committee.
Yeah, and she'll also be a member of the board. So her second day will be the July board meeting. So we'll have the opportunity to welcome her to that. But I think both the appointment of a Chief Safety Officer and the creation of this Patient Safety and Engagement Committee are 2 examples, not the only examples, but 2 more examples of our response to the Cumberland Review. And so I think it demonstrates genuinely that we want to really improve our oversight of patient safety in the organisation. So that being the case, were there any specific questions for Mercy's paper that anyone would like to ask? Mercy, it looks like you've done a fabulous job, so thank you for that. But again, I think it's really important just to carry on the momentum. And I know that your committee is going to be meeting to talk about the communications strategy, which will be presented at the next board meeting too. So I think that's again just showing that patient involvement and engagement is going to be right through the organisation. So thank you for your work on that. Okay, that being the case then, let's move on to the next paper, which is Dynamic Organisation on page 43. And that's what assurance can be provided by the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee. Anthony, do you want to make some introductory comments, please?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. As you can see from the paper, we're continuing to meet on a monthly basis at the moment, given our role in supporting the executive with the change programme. And I think that's been actually very helpful because it has allowed us to continue to challenge timelines. In saying that, the timeline is delivering to plan. We were really pleased with the functional structure and we made some hopefully helpful comments on the design principles and the span of control, which I think we can see from the paper that there is a real opportunity here for the agency to take some early action regarding its competency framework and also the scientific ladder to deal with some of the previous challenges that as an organisation we'd sort of allowed to develop. So one-on-one reporting to a scientist because we wanted to reward their scientific recognition. We gave them some sort of managerial responsibility, which we don't need to do. And so that's going to be looked at this month and we'll see a report on that next month, alongside, as I mentioned earlier, some more detail and significant data, if you like, on the available productivity of the organisation. What will we be delivering in this new organisation across the board, not just on the regulatory side? And we'll bring that to the board. We're considering it at our May meeting, May the 6th. So hopefully we can bring an update to the board in May alongside the diversity. Yeah. Every month we review the communications, obviously within the agency, because I think that's a key part of organisational change. And the feedback this month really does suggest that staff have started to understand that this transformation will bring significant change. And actually, I'm really pleased to see from the data that the majority are starting. It's a small majority, but the majority are feeling it will impact positively on the organisation's objectives and deliverables. And then finally, the previous Remuneration Committee had quite a detailed role in approving executive packages. We don't feel there's any value in that, given that we work within the civil service pay scale and the agency's got very clear pay scales. So what we've done as a committee is say we will only engage in remuneration where there's an element of discretion, and you can see some of the detail in the paper.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Were there any specific questions around that? Mercy.
It's more of a comment, and it's something I'm kind of thinking about as well, which is about this idea of culture change and how you measure that within an organisation. And I remember working with a group of experts really on behavioural change and culture change, and in fact some of them pop up on stage now, you know, sort of professors of various kinds who actually this is their area. Looking at behavioural and culture change, and I just wondered if you know we can tap into that area of expertise, or if we're already doing that. And I wonder if Anthony has any ideas of that. I'm certainly thinking about that round, you know, kind of the patient engagement angle of it, and how we measure culture change.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Mercy. As you know, I delivered a lot of that myself when I worked, and I think where we're at the moment is actually starting to establish an understanding of what the culture to be. So setting, if you like, objectives. Obviously, they're not objectives. It's culture. It's per se is innate within an organisation. It's not a specific objective. But as we're starting to do that, one of the things, for example, was ensuring our values and the culture we want to achieve is very clear in the job specifications and the wider capabilities. So not just saying your job is to do this, but it's equally important how you do your job. And I think the executive have taken this on board. As to monitoring that, I think we're planning on looking at in the next few months when we've started to establish some of the objectives. But obviously it's hard to say at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
And the executive do have a lot of detail. In saying that, Rachel has a lot of work in the comms side. Vanessa has a lot of work on the HR side as well, where those sorts of things are managed through the staff surveys and feedback and all those sorts of things. So there's that formal element, but I know what you're getting. You're talking specifically about how we're going to change and measure that change.
And I was going to bring John Fundry in on that particular point, because obviously, John, I know you're working through the balanced scorecard and have been now for a few months. You know, is that going to incorporate some element of culture and you know, with some of the points that have been made by Mercy and Anthony?
Yes, it certainly is. But I think we've consciously decided that, if you like, the gestation of the balanced scorecard has taken long enough. So our view is to get it out in use and then basically seek further feedback. So I think once we actually get it in use next month, we would value Anthony's committee's views on how we can enhance it.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because I think, as John, I think you already know, my view is that this will need to iterate. I don't think I think the balanced scorecard and the measurement systems are going to take time to embed, and we'll develop and evolve them. So, you know, but as long as we can stay true to what is it we're trying to achieve, I think. Mercy, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just that I've just seen a note from the director of HR, who says there will be culture kind of documents and frameworks coming to your next committee, Anthony, and I'm going to be at that committee, so that's great.
Yes,
so,
yes, exactly. I was going to diversity element. I wasn't going to go into the detail of that, but you will be there, so you'll see that. But I think we shouldn't forget that one of the major drivers of this change is putting patients at the centre of what we do, and that is at the centre of the plan we saw previously, and that is a significant culture change for some of the organisation who have been technical scientists and are used to working to the science rather than perhaps the objective. So there's a significant culture change being measured right in the heart of everything we're doing.
Yeah, okay. And June, is there anything you want to just mention, just by way of summing up on this particular topic?
It couldn't be more important at this time. It's key to the successful change, and I'm really grateful to Mercy and to Anthony for keeping this as a constant theme. Did have the idea of developing some form of index, given that we want things that are measurable, but that may take a little while, because I think a number of tools will be in place to gauge whether there has been change. We've already talked about importance of a baseline, but what are the key indicators that tell us that things are changing to become outward and patient focused? So it's a journey, but I'm glad to say we started on it.
Yeah, and there's also the benefit of taking the opportunity for external input and advice, you know, and I think that's the benefit of using external consultants, is they can bring some of that thinking into our organisation where we haven't necessarily got all the skills or all the experiences that we might need. So I think that's something we can maybe lean on the consultants for as well, June, is what I would suggest. So I think if there are no other questions, I think we'll note that report for with thanks. So thank you, Anthony. And again, just note the point around executive remuneration in terms of the intention for the committee to frankly review the areas of remuneration where there is discretion and not to interfere with those that are not. Mercy, was that a related point?
Actually, it's to my report.
I was just going to come back to your report to
Great.
just formally note Mercy's proposal, because I forgot to do that.
Yeah.
To formally note the fact that we'll use the board assurance report as the public-facing document that we'll publish on our websites, and we'll just have to figure out the best way to do that through the website with Rachel in due course. Okay, Anthony?
Yeah, ditto for ours. I mean, I'd always assumed that this would be the public-facing document, so we don't have separate. Yeah,
and then similarly, presumably with Audit and Risk Assurance Committee as well, because it's already in the public domain, Michael, through the board meeting.
Yes, Stephen, sorry, I don't mean to be awkward. I think it's just been absolute that we're not out of sync with other public bodies within the. So what you do tend to find, if you go on the website within the Department of Health and you look at all of the bodies that support the Department of Health, the formal minutes of the Audit Committee are published, I think. I just need to check that. So in principle, yes, but I just want to make sure that we're not out of sync with the rest of the non-departmental public bodies.
But I think the important principle we're trying to achieve here is a level of transparency that hasn't existed previously. Is to make not only board meetings, all board meetings in public, also hold all committee meeting reports in public. And I think we're talking of what is the format of the report, Michael. And I think an interpretive report to the board to explain this is what it means is actually frankly more helpful than to say the minutes or the action X had been done by the 15th of June. I'm not sure that's too helpful, if I'm completely honest. And I think interpretation is vital, will be my own perspective, but by all means, please check it out. Okay, so I think unless there are any other questions, let's note the two assurance reports with thanks. And that brings us towards the end of the board meeting main agenda items with papers. That brings us then on to the opportunity for questions from members of the public. I've seen on the chat function, there's been a number of questions coming through. Rachel, as I promised at the beginning, if you would like to start the questions, that would be great. And first question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So there's a mix of questions that were pre-submitted and also a number of questions that attendees have posed in the chat. So I thought we would start with one that actually came from a member of staff, and that question asks whether it's the long-term ambition of the MHRA to expand on the services it provides.
Okay, that's a great question. June, do you want to kick us off on that?
Yes, it is a really good question, and clearly the departure of the UK, completing our transition from leaving the EU, does really open the door to consider what services we'd like to develop, what we would like to maintain, and even what services we might to discontinue. So it really is the time to be having these thoughts and very much welcoming staff engagement on them. And if you've got brilliant ideas, do tell us. I think our delivery plan is the great place to start, because that should set the scene for these, ideas and so on to flow. Because this isn't about simply surviving as an agency in a financially sustainable way, but it is actually creating new opportunities and new services. And I think that the initial priorities in the delivery plan will give a lot of food for thought. But even beyond this, colleagues will probably be aware that we're hosting the G7 important conference this summer, and there will be ideas around, dare I say, clinical trials, artificial intelligence, AMR and pandemic preparedness. So let those ideas flow, and I'll probably be looking to Rachel B, seeing as you fired this as the first question, to help channel the amazing inventiveness and positive ideas that will come from our own staff.
So I think the principle is there's going to be a number of new services that will be developed over time. I think that's great. Okay. I think our second question was going to be asked by a member of the audience who submitted a pre-submitted question, like someone called Peter Shelton. Peter, I don't know, you're on screen, but we can't see your face. Is it possible to switch your video on and so you could ask the question? Do we have a technical difficulty? Peter, welcome to the MHRA board. I'm very pleased to be able to join us. You've obviously given us your permission to show your image on the screen. Would you like to start by introducing yourself and say what your interest is in the MHRA, and then ask your question, please?
Surely. My name is Peter Shelton. I'm retired CEO and compliance director, but these days just a bit of consultancy. I speak with invested interest in that I'm a beneficiary of the Cancer Drugs Fund, which I have to say, without it, I wouldn't be talking to you today. My question is, because you'll find is linked to that problem. It's basically, given the success and efficiency of the vaccine approval process, will it now be possible to introduce a swift and efficient mechanism to introduce a limited early stage approval of already approved drugs where one or more is currently monotherapy only? This in the context of support from highly successful early stage trial results.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter. That's a really good question, actually. June, do you want to start the answer of that?
Well, thank you again, Mr. Shelton. Peter, it's really helpful when we look at the services we currently offer for early access and see what more we can do. And you've probably been aware that we have an early access to medicine scheme. And we also have been talking, even in this meeting, about the innovative licensing and access pathway. So those tell you how committed we are, that we shouldn't keep patients waiting. I think what you're talking about is one of the medicines of interest is a licensed monotherapy, only to be used as a single treatment. And as a result of your question, I'll be asking staff how we can actually look to, if there's a body of data that support combination treatment, look to safe early access. Early access does really mean being able to monitor how patients do in the real world. And thankfully, we've got good systems and expertise to help us do that. So I think you've started an important conversation here. How adaptable are our early access systems in the context of new data that may come to support combination? So, Stephen, Chair, I'd like to take that one away and see how our present systems can be adapted. Because as I say, if there are new data, we should be looking at that and able to convert that into the terms in which patient can safely have access to that combination.
Okay, Peter, does that sort of partly at least answer the questions to demonstrate we recognise the issue and we'll need to do some more work on it? Is there any other context you want to add?
No, that broadly recognises the situation. I've spent many happy hours having email conversations with your body and also NICE to try and understand how processes work. And I quite understand the necessity for prudence, as we've seen from the COVID vaccination programme. Yeah. But sometimes in terms of life-threatening conditions, it's useful to be able to get a handle on these somewhat earlier, particularly if a patient is reasonably well informed and has taken the trouble and made the effort to try and find out what's best for them.
No, and I think we're seeing increasingly that patients are informed. The internet is a wonderful thing. It's not always wonderful, but it does give much more access to information. Christian, I'm just wondering how we can build this into the principle behind this into things like ILAP and our clinical trials and looking at earlier stage results to help to make regulatory decisions. Is there any other perspective you could add?
Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for raising that. So as a clinician, I have full sympathy for your question. What I'm saying now is very preliminary, and it's just an observation. So to authorize a combination therapy as compared to 2 monotherapies requires an application by an applicant. That is the conservative answer. So if a company does not come forward to ask for this to be approved, we formally can't approve it. However, this is not where we should end. This is where we should start, because indeed, if this is an access issue, that, for example, it's about reimbursement or something else, I think we should maybe discuss with our partners in the system how we can, as a system, react in a much more agile way to allow for very promising combination treatments. Many of these are studied in academic trials, so they're not kind of industry sponsored, and especially cancer is a fast-moving field. So maybe an authorization itself cannot necessarily take care of all of the different combinations that are coming up. However, I think there should be a possibility to provide evidence to partners and to work together to find a way how we can nevertheless as a system react to this. Because in fact, if you look at targeted therapies, for example, there might not be data from big trials, but scientifically and medically, it makes absolute sense to combine these treatments because they target specific mutations that a patient has. And if that is the case, then I think the system should be able to respond and maybe also set up a plan on how the interaction between the 2 medicines, if there is not much data, could be looked at more systematically. Because if we don't know how the 2 treatments interact on an adverse event level, then of course we will have to find a system there as well. So to cut a long story short, I think there should be a possibility to build this into our early ways, and I've taken note of that, and I will discuss that with colleagues.
Okay.
So thanks for raising it.
Well, thank you very much for raising that, Peter. I think we've got your contact details, so I'll ensure that you get a response. I know June's taken the action, but June will work with the team to make sure you get a formal response to that inquiry. But thank you very much for asking the question. We really appreciate your input today. So thank you very much, and have a good day. Rachel, can we move on to another question, please?
Yeah, I thought we'd move on to another question about market access, actually. So the questioner is saying that access normally relates to market access, work with NICE and things like pricing. So they're asking whether the MHRA sees its regulatory remit changing. So changing in any way beyond regulatory approval and early access schemes, and asking what would be new in the access strategy.
Okay. June, can you just help us with that one, please?
Core regulatory activity, if you like, and it's our benefit risk judgments, is always contextualized in the population for whom an intervention, a drug or a device will be used. And I think that has to remain at the heart. But as we look to outcomes, the only way that we will be properly part of an end-to-end system, from the trial subject right through to the standard of care for patients, is that if we work very closely. Yes, there are some very interesting thoughts about a more synergistic way of working, and at certain phases of that end-to-end pathway, that might be quite appropriate. But the public trusts us to make, without fear or favour, that independent, scientifically based judgment on benefit risk. And I think that is the part that will always be quite properly for a regulator to, if you like, preside over. And if it is of a matter of assurance to any colleague, there is never, ever any pressure or interference with that heart of the matter, that the public can be trusting us to decide benefit risk, favourable or not, as a very independent step on that pathway. But for the future, let's look to optimise how our synergies operate.
So I think if I interpret that, June, I think what you're saying is the role of the regulator will not change, but our working relationship with other parts of the system must and will continue to improve. I think that's how I'm understanding it. so that it's more seamless from the external environment for patients or for industry or for developers. So, okay, thank you for that. Rachel. Oh, sorry, Christine, were you going to add something onto that?
Well, just very brief if there's time, Stephen, just to say that indeed June raises an important point, and this is the kind of conflict that you could have if you take a regulatory decision, being mindful of the cost of that treatment later. Because then you could be biased to say this is so expensive that we can just not authorize it. So there must be some sort of a scientific only judgment when it comes to authorization. However, as June has very correctly pointed out, there is a lot of room for discussion, because I'm convinced personally that the risk benefit judgment that we are doing and the cost benefit judgment that a payer is doing can maybe find a common denominator of evidence. And this is, I think, where we can come in, so that not yet another set of trials is required to establish cost benefit when we have already looked at risk benefit. So I think that there is a good way forward also to discuss on these two aspects and how they can converge. Thanks.
Yeah, I think using the same data wherever possible is always going to be a good thing. Anthony, you've got experience from the health technology side as well.
Yeah, I'm not actually going to comment on that. What I'm going to comment on is the fact that Peter, I think it was, who asked the question initially, and this conversation have highlighted to me that I think there's a real opportunity for some simplistic joint communication from the agency and NICE. The fact that people are having to search for what the processes are, how does this work, and what are the organisation's different roles, I think we can help patients and the public understand a bit more if we work with NICE and put perhaps something out that's a joint, how do we work? And also, to Christian's point, what are we working on for the future? Because this has highlighted a number of future areas for joint working.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Rachel, maybe, I know you and I talked about the communication strategy only yesterday, so maybe we can add that as an idea into into the mix, please.
Yeah, happy to add that to our list.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, another question, please.
Okay, so I would take us on to a vaccines question, and this is about mixing vaccine doses. So, for example, a first dose of AstraZeneca and a second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, or vice versa. And the questioner is asking whether the MHRA has to approve this, or whether the fact that both vaccines are individually approved would be sufficient for a mixed use.
Okay, June. I think you're on mute, June.
We would indeed need to approve the change, because the authorisations, the approvals of the current COVID-19 vaccines are all for 2 doses of the same vaccine. And thankfully, there's some really good work currently underway. You'll have heard about some early releases, and there'll be more to come in September that will enable a heterologous or a mix and match approach. And it's so important that we enable these kinds of new developments, given the need to get the adult population fully protected against this awful condition. So it would need a change to the individual licenses. I think what I hear of your question, whether the actual combination itself would be approved, we would expect that would be also a matter around the deployment decisions, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. But yes, this is a set of data we're eagerly looking forward to, because there will be regulatory decisions.
Okay, so the clinical work is underway for looking at mix and match, but the current situation is very clear that it's 2 doses of the same vaccine. That is the current advice at this moment in time. So we just need to be really clear about that, I think. Okay, Rachel, another question.
Yeah. Thank you. And there's now a group of questions that are about different aspects of patient engagement and involvement. So if we start with one about patient information, and the questioner is saying the MHRA has championed good patient information and user testing since publication of the Always Read the Leaflet report in 2005. the questioner is saying that one of the big themes currently being debated in industry is providing electronic information, both to enhance provision of information, but also where possible replace paper leaflets, as many patients now access information electronically. So the questioner is asking whether the MHRA would be at the forefront of this, because it was an area crying out for world leadership, I suppose, in that shift to digital information.
Okay, so June, I suppose there's two questions there in the sense of, can we provide the information digitally, but should it replace or should it complement, I suppose, is the other component to that.
Well, this is a really important and exciting area, because to truly deliver value and protect patients from any risks needs really good information. And I'm glad that our questioner recognises the leadership that the agency did provide with always read the leaflet, because again and again, having the right information at the right time gets the best out of a medicine. Certainly, the access to electronic information has to be supported, and clearly many a leaflet is downloaded. We have a repository of all the leaflets, and we would want to make sure that that access is enhanced. Whether or not paper leaflets would be outmoded, that's something for the future. We've introduced things like the QR code on the outside of packs, and links to other information that can be useful for the general health and welfare of the patient if it's related to the product. So lots to think about there. And I think our earlier question about services is another real opportunity to show regulatory evolution and leadership, because really the information that we provide to patients is absolutely critical. Yeah.
So I think there's definitely an opportunity for online. I think there's probably an open question in terms of whether it replaces paper leaflets in the pack. That's probably something we will need to think about quite carefully. Okay, Rachel, another question, please.
Yeah, so this one is a question about the Yellowcard Biobank, which was discussed earlier, and whether it should have a different name which would engage patients more. And the questioner is saying perhaps something like Genomics Yellowcard or MHRA Genomics would be more easily understood by lay people and the public, because biobank is a term that speaks to scientific experts, but perhaps less so to the general public.
Okay, well, under normal circumstances, Rachel, I'd ask you to answer that question. But as you asked the question, I better ask June.
Well, that's really, really interesting, because when you're trying to, I think, build trust and accessibility and support, names do count. We all know the what's in a name quote, but it really does help. And our yellow card scheme has been the cornerstone of safety for, 60 years probably. And the trust in that scheme for us to safeguard those really important confidential things that are shared with us, so important. So I think when it comes to going into the new dimension of your genetic makeup helping others, that trust is going to be key. So no clear answer today, but let's start that discussion. And I will ask the team that are leading the Yellowcard Biobank development to include this question in the discussions with patients and healthcare professionals, so that they can get that aspect of input that we will need to listen to others on.
Okay, thank you. David, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a good point. I think for those of us who are part of Biobank, which is a certain age group, mostly between our now 60s and 80s, Biobank does mean something, but that's only 500,000 people in the UK. So I think for the public, Biobank does just sound like a scientific thing, but what it means is unclear. So if this is about genetics, genomics, Yellowcard Genomics might actually, or Yellowcard Genetics might give a clearer picture of what it's about.
Okay.
So I think it's a good question.
Yeah, okay. And Barbara, you've got a perspective as well? If you can unmute.
Trying. I'm concerned about information that you read online or otherwise, and other ways of getting information. Because working with people from different communities, it's quite clear that people who speak English well don't necessarily read it well, and they don't necessarily read the text in the way that you think they might read the text. And we've learnt by example in dealing with vaccine hesitancy that actually being spoken to by someone from your own community makes a big difference to people being able to hear and make decisions. And I wonder whether we should have a library of video information about medicines to augment the written word.
Yeah, and potentially in other languages apart from English as well, maybe.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, so I think interesting idea there, actually. So again, something else for your communications list, Rachel. So then we'll ask you the question next month.
Great, thanks very much. So
Okay.
shall we move on to another patient involvement question? So that this question recognises that medical charities who are heavily involved in patient and public involvement and engagement know that that comes at a cost. And the questioner is asking whether, when considering patient and public involvement and engagement, will the agency be setting the budget first and then fitting in the strands of PPI that would fit and presumably are affordable, or be led by patients and the public when it comes to their priorities?
Okay, so why don't we ask our financial officer, John Fundry, to answer that, because there are, so in terms of John, I think there's a very clear question there, is what comes first, the activity or the budget?
So on the current process, we're actually going through definition of, you know, what do we actually need to do and what resources do we need to provide it. Now, that said, we would then need to determine where the funding for that activity comes from, whether it's from government funding or possibly through the overall fees envelope. And there are constraints really around what we can actually include in our fees. So the short answer is we look at the requirement and then work out how we fund it.
Okay, so I think that's a helpful context actually, because of the two questions there. It's what do you need to do, and then it's also who pays for it effectively as well. So there's two components. Thank you, John. That's helpful. Rachel?
Yeah, so if we move on to the next question, this one is about a product called isotretinoin, and the questioner is asking whether the MHRA is concerned about the number of deaths and injuries that have been reported during a review being carried out by an expert working group, and whether the MHRA has the power to suspend the drug if they felt that patients were at risk.
Okay, June, a very important question here. Can I ask you to take that one on?
Yes, it certainly is a really important question, and I kind of want to address the underlying concern about the time to get things moving, which has been quite heavily impacted by COVID-19 and considerations around that. But I would like to just say up front, the resolve to get this really well done, involving patients with an expert working group that will have its meeting on the 5th of May, is an absolute commitment by the agency. And you know, I hope that helps to address some of the underlying issues about the time that's passing. We're there now. We're going to get this done to a really high level, and to show that patient involvement in the process is real, it's meaningful, and it will be fully taken into account in the conclusions. So in terms of the time that passes and when any fatalities have occurred, the team involved always in investigating fully and absolutely rigorously any outcome of a report that results in a fatal outcome, that is part and parcel. And the dates that I can refer to at this moment were well before this particular planning period. Between 1996 and May 2019 is what I know. I think the planning for involving patients will include patient perspectives on the regulatory tools. And this is the other key message, is that all the tools are on the table. We've got abilities to update information, to amend information, to restrict the population exposed, and right through to suspension or revocation. So we've got a range of regulatory tools that can be applied and will be applied in reference to the risks that the assessment identifies. So everything's on the table. Patients and the public will have their views, and patient groups particularly here. And I'll just finish to say a thank you to all those patient groups who've shared experiences and perspectives. Each one will be valued and factored into the final review outcome.
So if I can just summarise, June, just to make sure I understand myself, the expert working group has been set up. We know that. The first meeting that's going to involve patients is going to be on the 5th of May.
They won't be involved on the 5th. That's a dedicated session after that. But that's
okay. So the first meeting of the expert working
after group. The evidence has been gathered. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Then there'll be obviously a review of that evidence. What are the next steps, just so I can understand, what then happens in broad terms?
Then there will be a date set for the patients to contribute. Yep. And that hasn't been set so far as my information of this morning, but it's to make sure that we get the full range of patient availability and the expert availability to bring that together. The aim is July, but the specific date hasn't yet been set.
Okay, but it's very much work in progress. There's a commitment to address the issue and to give an appropriate response at the end of that detailed process. Okay, thank you for that. Rachel, is there another question?
Yeah, there's a couple more questions, Stephen. The first of those is about a previous commitment that the agency made in the life sciences sector deal 2, which was about a new pathway on genomics by March 2021. And the questioner is asking whether there is any update on this in the delivery plan.
That's a very good question. June, I'm sorry to bounce that one to you, but can you remember the commitment that was made? And
yes, but I don't have a specific update today. Colleagues who know the makeup of the agency will know that resources and expertise in the area of genomics has been quite in short supply, and due to staff changes over recent months, we may have, if you like, lost that focus that would have been enabling a direct answer today. So happy to follow up.
Yeah, could I make a suggestion that we add that into the action list, Natalie, and we give a verbal update at the next meeting in terms of an answer to that particular question around genomics. Okay, thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, and the last question is, which is on my list, is whether the UK will join a body called ICH, which is the key international body on guidance and standards, and whether joining ICH will be in the 2021 to 2023 international strategy.
Okay, June.
Well, to take the last one first, it will certainly be in the strategy. We've clearly made our application overtures, and there is an international assembly in June for ICH where we'll be making the case. Observer status initially, it's quite a rigorous process, but we'll be hopefully moving towards full membership as soon as we can. It will be a key part of our international strategy.
And just for members of the public, can you just say what ICH stands for?
Oh, I'm so sorry. International Conference on Harmonisation, which started some 20-25 years ago between Europe, the US and Japan. And it has done a really important job to bring together standards. And that might sound a bit obscure, but in actual fact, common standards expedites products coming forward. And there is an equivalent for devices that we're also seeking to join, medical devices.
Good. Okay, thank you for that. And I think we're going to be looking as a board at a first draft of that international strategy next month. So we don't have too long to wait to start to see that coming together. Okay, Rachel, does that mean you've only got one question left?
Yeah, there's just one left, which is about recent guidance on patient involvement in clinical trials from the clinical trials unit. And the questioner says that recent guidance was welcomed, but is there any more about the detail of it, as the information was quite high level?
Okay, so Christian, are you in a position to make a comment on that?
Well, I can try at least. So this is currently a voluntary process. So basically, the ultimate aim for this is to have patient involvement systematically into the protocol design of a clinical trial, and with a view to get patient relevant outcomes. That doesn't mean that outcomes currently measured are not relevant for patients, but sometimes it can be done in a smarter way. And we'd like to engage industry on this. Obviously, this has to be tried out first. So in order to find out what the added benefit actually is, and also what implications this has. So this is why we have started this initiative, this pilot recently, and we will then have an assessment. But that's, I think, all I can say now.
Okay, and is there anything else you want to add, June?
It is high-level information at this stage, commensurate with the pilot status, but certainly as we gain more information, we'll be providing it.
Okay, that'd be great. So, Rachel, I take it we've now, all the public questions have been answered, I take it.
Yeah, that's right. That concludes all the pre-submitted and the questions asked during the meeting. So as usual, big thanks to everyone that's put questions forward. I think we've had a really good range of topics there.
Yeah, I would just echo that. So thank you very much to everyone who's taken the trouble not only to watch the meeting, but also to participate by asking questions. I'd look forward to continuing this dialogue at our next board meeting, which will be held in public in 4 weeks' time on Tuesday, the 18th of May at 10 o'clock. In the meantime, I'd just like to say that the MHRA will start implementing the delivery plan that we've approved today. We will put patients first. We will be facilitating innovation. We'll be enabling access and certainly ensuring patient safety as a dynamic, collaborative and sustainable organisation. So there's lots to do, a really important role that the agency's got. So thank you to everyone for your participation today, and we'll see you all again next time. Thanks a lot and bye-bye.